Right now, in factories all over China, workers are ripping apart dead batteries on purpose, not by accident, not because they have to. They are doing it because someone found out that trash might be one of the biggest businesses on the planet. A dead car battery that looks like a heavy black brick is holding metal worth more, pound for pound, than a lot of what comes out of a real mine. A crumbled apartment building is being turned into brand new roads, and in a quiet warehouse somewhere, a bucket of rotting food scraps is being turned straight into electricity. This is not science fiction. It is happening right now in 2026 in cities you have probably never heard of. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why a country that builds more phones, more cars, and more buildings than anyone else on Earth suddenly decided that old junk is worth chasing. The government even put a price tag on it, a price tag measured in trillions of dollars. Stick with me, because that number is real, and I am going to show you exactly how we get there. The dead battery, worth more than gold. Let's start with the battery, because it is the easiest way to see the whole idea. Pull a battery pack out of an old electric car. It looks dead, heavy, black, and completely useless. That is what most people would think. But that battery is not trash. It is a treasure chest that somebody already did the hard work of building for you. Inside it are metals like lithium, nickel, cobalt, and copper. These are the exact same metals that car companies all over the world are fighting to get their hands on right now. Normally, you would have to dig a hole in the ground, crush thousands of pounds of rock, and use dangerous chemicals just to get a tiny bit of these metals out. But this battery already has them, sitting there in a nice, clean, refined form. Someone just has to take it apart the right way. So here is what actually happens to it. First, workers check the battery to see how much charge is still inside. This step is a lot more dangerous than it sounds. A half-charged battery that gets crushed the wrong way can catch fire in seconds. So this part has to be done slowly and carefully. Next, they check if the battery still has some life left in it. Sometimes, a battery that is too weak to push a car up a hill can still be strong enough to sit in a building and store solar power at night. That is a smart way to use it a little longer. But it is not the final answer. That battery still has to be broken down eventually. When it is finally time, the battery gets torn apart, shredded, and sorted. What is left over is a fine, dark powder that workers in the industry call black mass. This is the whole point of the entire process. The black-gray powder is packed with the exact same metals that go into brand new batteries. Send it to the right factory, and it becomes part of a brand new battery pack, ready to go right back into a brand new car. Here is the part that really shows how serious this has become. Most experts agree that China now handles a huge share of the entire world's battery recycling, likely well over half of it. This is not a small side hustle. This is a country building an entire second mining industry, except instead of digging into the earth, they are digging into their own trash. And they made it easier for themselves, too. Not long ago, China set up official rules that let this black mass powder move around and get imported more easily, as long as it meets a certain safety standard. While a lot of other countries were making it harder to move this material around, China opened the door wider. But here's a twist that most people never hear about. Even with all this fancy equipment and all these official rules, a lot of licensed and properly regulated battery recycling plants in China are only running at a fraction of what they could handle. Why would that happen if the demand is so high? Because a lot of the old batteries are quietly being grabbed by small, unofficial workshops that do not follow the safety rules and do not pay the extra costs. They can offer more money for the old batteries because they are cutting corners the official companies are not allowed to cut. Think about how strange that actually is. You have giant factories built with expensive machines, ready and waiting to shred batteries and pull out valuable metal. And yet, a good chunk of those machines sit half empty, not because there is nothing to shred, but because the batteries are getting scooped up somewhere else first. It is a little like building a huge, shiny bakery and then watching most of the customers walk past it to buy bread from a guy selling loaves out of the back of a truck. The truck is not following the same rules, so it can charge less and pay more for the flour. That difference between the official chemistries also matters a lot here. Some batteries are packed with expensive metals like nickel and cobalt, which makes them a genuine jackpot for a recycler. Other batteries are built with a cheaper recipe that saves drivers money at the store, but leaves almost nothing valuable behind once the battery finally dies. So even inside the world of batteries, some trash is treasure and some trash is just trash. It depends entirely on what recipe went into it in the first place. So even in the best example on this list, the system is not perfect. The battery is valuable enough to make all this effort worth it. But not every kind of trash is this easy. Some of it is worth almost nothing on its own, and that is exactly why it becomes such a headache. If a story like this surprises you, this channel is full of them. I dig into the strange hidden systems that quietly run our world, the kind of stuff you would never notice unless someone pointed a camera right at it. If you want to see exactly how this trash story connects to a $1 trillion plan later in this video, hit subscribe now so you do not miss where this is heading. All right, let's keep going. The plastic nobody else wanted. A clean plastic water bottle is an easy problem to solve. It is one single type of plastic with nothing else stuck to it. You wash it, melt it, and turn it into a new bottle. Simple. Now think about a chip bag. It is not just plastic. It is a thin layer of plastic glued to a shiny metal layer, glued to a printed layer, glued together with sticky glue, and coated in a bit of grease from the chips themselves. There is no easy machine that can peel all of that apart cleanly, because the whole bag was designed so those layers would never come apart in the first place. That is the real plastic problem. It is never really about water bottles. It is about all the tricky stuff like wrappers, films, and mixed materials that were built to stay stuck together forever. To understand why China cares so much about fixing this, we actually need to look back at history because most people have this story completely backwards. For decades, China was basically the entire world's recycling bin. Countries like the United States and countries across Europe would toss their used plastic in a bin, ship it across the ocean, and China would take it. Over time, China ended up taking in close to half of all the plastic waste traded around the whole world. But here's the twist nobody expects. This was never really about being kind to the planet. It was raw material. Factories in China needed cheap plastic to make new products, and shipments from other countries were an easy way to get it. Then, in 2018, everything changed overnight. China announced a strict new rule that banned a long list of imported waste and made the cleanliness rules so tough that almost nothing could pass. Almost overnight, plastic waste shipments into China dropped by nearly all of it. Recycling programs in other countries fell apart because they had nowhere left to send their bins. Some countries started burning more of their own trash instead. Warehouses in smaller countries in Southeast Asia got buried under mountains of plastic bales they never even asked for. The whole world suddenly discovered that its recycling system had really just been one single country the whole time. And that country had just shut the door. But here's the part people miss. That door closing was not really about being green either. China's factories still needed plastic to build things. If it was not coming from other countries anymore, it had to come from somewhere else. So China was forced to build its own massive plastic collection system at home, sorting and gathering its own trash, instead of relying on the rest of the world to ship it over. That is why today, China is investing heavily in ways to break plastic down chemically instead of just melting it. Instead of only mechanically shredding and remelting plastic, which makes it weaker every single time you do it, some factories are breaking plastic all the way down to its tiny building blocks and rebuilding it from scratch. It costs more and takes fancier equipment, but it can handle messy plastic that regular recycling could never touch. There's another twist buried in this story too. Not every kind of plastic recycling is actually the same thing, even though people talk about it like it is one single process. Melting plastic down and reshaping it, which is the classic method, gets weaker every single time you do it. Do it enough times, and the plastic becomes too brittle to use for much of anything. Breaking plastic down chemically into its tiny building blocks is a completely different job. It can rebuild plastic that is almost as strong as the original, but it needs bigger machines, more energy, and much cleaner sorting to work properly. Anyone who talks about these two methods as if they are the exact same thing is skipping over a pretty important detail. And here's something that might surprise you. A lot of the plastic waste that gets shredded and melted down does not become a shiny new bottle at all. Sometimes it becomes a low-grade fuel or a raw chemical ingredient instead. That is still useful. It still keeps material out of a landfill. But it is not quite the same magic trick as turning old plastic straight back into new plastic. The truth sits somewhere in the middle, better than throwing it away, but not quite the perfect loop people imagine when they hear the word recycling. So plastic is a story about a door slamming shut and forcing a whole country to solve its own trash problem. But that solved one kind of hard trash. There is an even bigger kind of trash sitting right in front of us, one made of solid concrete and steel, and it dwarfs everything we have talked about so far. Here is where it gets interesting. Smashing cities into gravel and mining gold. From old phones, forget batteries, forget plastic bottles. If you just look at pure weight, the single biggest pile of trash in all of China is not from cars or phones. It comes from buildings. When a building gets torn down, what is left behind is a giant mixed pile of concrete, bent steel bars, bricks, broken glass, wood, and plaster. Compared to batteries, the process here is almost boring. Trucks bring in the rubble. Workers pull out anything big and reusable first. Metal gets grabbed by hand or by giant magnets. The leftover concrete and brick gets crushed by huge machines into smaller and smaller pieces. Screens sort the pieces by size, and blasts of air blow away lighter junk that snuck in. What is left over is called recycled aggregate, and it gets used to build new roads, fill in construction sites, or mix into new concrete. There is no fancy chemistry here. No black powder, no secret formula, just crushing. And yet, China produces an almost unbelievable amount of this stuff every single year, likely well over 2 billion tons of construction waste. Out of all of that, only a small slice actually gets turned into something new. A lot of cities still end up dumping huge amounts of it into scattered landfills because it is simply cheaper to dump it than to properly sort and crush it. So why is the easiest process on this whole list also one of the worst performing? It comes down to money. Crushing concrete costs money and takes effort. Dumping it in a landfill is often cheaper, at least for now. The technology to fix this has existed for years. The real problem has always been convincing people it is worth paying for. Now let's jump to something completely different, but just as surprising. Think about an old broken phone sitting in a drawer somewhere. It looks like junk. But here's a wild fact. A pile of old broken circuit boards, pound for pound, can actually contain more gold than a pile of rock pulled straight out of an actual gold mine. That is not an exaggeration. That is why people in this industry call it urban mining. The richest gold deposit near a big Chinese city is not hidden underground somewhere far away. It is sitting in a warehouse full of dead phones, printers, and old laptops. The process for pulling that value out looks a lot like the battery story. Workers collect old electronics, pull out anything dangerous like batteries first, and separate anything that can be reused as is. Then, the devices get taken apart by hand or shredded by machine. Magnets grab the iron and steel. Special machines using electric currents pull out other metals. What is left gets treated with heat or chemicals to pull out the valuable stuff, things like copper, silver, and gold. China has been building this system fast. Every year, tens of millions of old phones and home appliances get pulled into official, properly regulated recycling centers instead of ending up tossed in a landfill or broken apart by hand in someone's backyard. Some single factories can process thousands of old appliances every single day, splitting a single old refrigerator into clean piles of plastic, metal, and foam, each one heading off to become something brand new. There's also a quality problem hiding underneath all of this. Crushed concrete is not automatically good concrete. If the rubble came from a messy, uncontrolled demolition site, it might be full of dirt, wood, plastic, and other junk mixed in, which makes the crushed material weak and unreliable. But if the rubble comes from a careful, well-managed demolition, sorted properly from the very start, the crushed material can actually be strong enough for an engineer to sign off on using it in brand new buildings and roads. So the machines are not really the missing piece here. Careful planning at the demolition site is. Now picture that same idea, but shrunk down to fit in the palm of your hand. That is basically what old electronics are, and it is not just gold hiding in those old gadgets either. There is silver, copper, and even rare little specialty metals tucked inside screens, batteries, and wires. The kind of metals that are genuinely difficult to dig up fresh from the ground anywhere in the world. Every single old phone sitting unused in a drawer is basically a tiny sealed treasure chest, just waiting for someone to finally crack it open the right way. So construction waste shows us the biggest, dumbest, cheapest kind of trash pile in the whole country. And old electronics show us that some trash is secretly worth chasing down to the very last gram. But there are two more kinds of trash left that are somehow even trickier than anything we have covered so far, and they might be the two hardest problems on this entire list. The panels and shirts nobody can take apart. A solar panel feels like the cleanest, most futuristic piece of technology you could imagine, right up until the day it stops working. Then it becomes a heavy slab of glass, metal, and chemicals that nobody quite knows what to do with. Inside a solar panel, most of the weight is just glass and a metal frame around the edges. That part is honestly not that special. But hidden inside the panel is a tiny sliver of silver, and that tiny sliver is worth more than everything else in the panel put together. In fact, that little bit of silver can make up more than half the entire value of the whole thing. Here's the catch, though. That panel was built to survive 30 years of sun, rain, and storms without falling apart. Every layer inside it was glued and sealed together on purpose, so tightly that water could never sneak in. Which means taking it apart cleanly on a factory line, quickly enough to actually make money, means undoing the exact thing engineers spent decades perfecting. So a lot of solar panel recycling in the real world only manages to grab the easy stuff, the frame and the glass, while the most valuable part, the silver, stays locked deep inside and mostly out of reach. And this wave of dead solar panels is only getting bigger. China installed a jaw-dropping number of solar panels over the past couple decades, and they are all getting old at roughly the same time. Within the next several years, the country is expected to be dealing with millions of tons of worn-out solar panels all needing somewhere to go. Now here is a completely different kind of trash that is somehow even harder to deal with, and you are probably wearing some of it right now. Pick up a plain cotton t-shirt. If the tag says 100% cotton, that is actually a fairly solvable recycling problem. But grab a normal shirt off the rack today, and the tag usually says something like 60% cotton, 35% polyester, and a bit of stretchy fabric mixed in, plus a printed design, a zipper, and buttons. That shirt is basically impossible for any machine on Earth to turn back into a brand new equal shirt. Mixed fabrics are the real enemy here, the exact same trick that made plastic wrappers so hard to deal with earlier in this video. The best outcome for old clothes is honestly the simplest one, just wearing them again, or fixing them up, which is real reuse. After that, old clothes often get shredded down into shorter, weaker fibers and stuffed into things like cushions or insulation. That is still recycling, technically, but it is a one-way trip. That shredded shirt is never becoming a shirt again. There is one more exciting option, though. Some companies in China have figured out how to chemically break certain synthetic fabrics all the way down to their basic building blocks, almost like unbaking a cake back into flour and eggs, and then use those pure building blocks to make brand new fabric from scratch. It is expensive and still fairly small scale, but it is real, and it is growing. Even with that progress, look at the honest numbers. China produces well over 20 million tons of textile waste every single year, and even the country's most hopeful official goals only expect to properly recycle around 30% of it by the end of this decade. Read that again. Even the most optimistic plan on the table admits that 7 out of every 10 old shirts and jackets are simply not coming back. There is one more wrinkle worth mentioning here too. Even when a factory does manage to reach that tiny sliver of silver, the amount recovered from any single panel is still small. It only makes financial sense once you're processing a huge volume of panels at once. So a lot of the real progress in this area is not really about inventing some magical new machine. It is about simply having enough dead panels piling up in one place to make the whole effort worth setting up in the first place. Scale ends up being just as important as the science. So solar panels show us something glued together too tightly to easily take apart. Old clothes show us something blended together too messily to easily sort out. Both of them are stuck. But there is one final kind of trash left, and this one is not stuck at all. In fact, it is the one piece of this whole puzzle that changed almost overnight, and it is the key to understanding that giant trillion-dollar number I promised you at the start of this video. The law that changed everything, and the trillion-dollar plan. Out of everything we have talked about so far, food waste sounds like it should be the boring one. It is not batteries. It is not gold. It is just old vegetables and leftover rice. But in a country like China, food waste has historically made up a huge chunk of all household trash, sometimes more than half of everything a family throws away in a single day. And here's why that matters so much. Food waste is heavy, wet, and messy. When it gets mixed in with everything else in the trash can, it ruins the recyclables around it and makes the whole pile harder and less valuable to deal with. Food waste does not just create its own problem. It makes every single other kind of trash on this list worse. But separate that food waste out on its own, and something surprisingly simple happens. You seal it up in a big tank with no oxygen inside, and tiny microorganisms slowly break it down over time. That process creates a gas that can be burned for heat or turned into electricity. What is left over afterward can sometimes be turned into fertilizer for farms, as long as it is cleaned up properly first. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine trying to sort a box of clean, dry paper and plastic, except someone has already poured a bowl of soup all over the top of it. Suddenly nothing in that box is clean anymore. The paper is soggy. The plastic is coated in grease. Everything that used to be valuable is now stuck together in one soggy mess. That is basically what food waste does to an entire trash system if it never gets separated out early. It is not just its own problem sitting off to the side. It is the ingredient that ruins every other ingredient around it. So here is the moment that changed the entire story. Back in 2019, the city of Shanghai passed a law that made sorting your household trash mandatory. Every home had to split their trash into different bins, one for food waste, one for recyclables, one for hazardous stuff, and one for everything else. People who sorted their trash wrong could actually get fined. At first, people hated it. It became a huge joke online, with people complaining that this new rule was driving the entire city insane. Then something wild happened. It actually worked. The amount of food waste being properly sorted more than doubled within a fairly short amount of time. And it was not just more waste, it was cleaner waste too, coming in with barely any contamination mixed into it. Recycling collections shot up. Hazardous waste that used to get quietly thrown away with everything else started getting properly collected at a much higher rate. And the regular leftover trash that could not be recycled dropped noticeably, simply because all the wet, heavy food waste was no longer mixed into it. Think about how wild that really is. Every single expensive machine we talked about earlier in this video, the shredders, the smelters, the chemical tanks, needed years of engineering to build. This fix did not need any new invention at all. It just needed 24 million people to agree to use 4 different bins instead of 1. And once they did, the entire system downstream got easier, cleaner, and cheaper almost overnight. Sometimes the biggest breakthrough is not a machine. It is just getting everyone to follow the same simple rule at the same time. Here is the real lesson hiding inside that story. The most powerful piece of technology in this entire video was not some fancy shredding machine or chemical process. It was a simple law that told millions of people exactly which bin to use. And that is where the real answer finally comes together. Every single story we covered today, the batteries, the plastic, the crushed buildings, the old phones, the solar panels, the stubborn shirts, and the food scraps, they are not separate little side projects happening by accident. They are all pieces of one giant national plan. China has set official targets to build what they call a circular economy, a system designed so that almost nothing ever truly leaves the loop as pure waste. Officials have tied enormous amounts of money to this plan, with projections putting the total value of this new trash-based economy well into the trillions of dollars over the coming years. That is the real reason none of this is happening out of kindness. It is happening because a country that builds more phones, more cars, more buildings, and more clothes than anywhere else on Earth eventually has to deal with all of it coming back around. And somebody in charge realized that dealing with it properly is not just a cost. It is one of the biggest business opportunities in the entire country. Think about what that actually means for the future. Every single battery rolling off a factory line today is a future pile of black powder waiting to happen in 10 years. Every solar panel bolted onto a roof today is a future puzzle of glass, metal, and silver waiting to be solved. Every single building going up right now is basically a future pile of gravel with a countdown timer attached to it. China is not just building things. It is quietly building the second half of each product's entire life at the exact same time, long before that product ever wears out. That is also why this is not just an environmental story, even though it might sound like one on the surface. It is really a story about money, competition, and control over materials that the whole world desperately needs. Countries that figure out how to properly recycle metals like lithium, copper, and silver will need to dig a lot less out of the ground in the future. And whoever controls that supply holds a lot of quiet power over industries like cars, phones, and electricity for decades to come. So next time you throw something away, whether it is an old phone, a worn-out shirt, or a dead battery, remember that somewhere in the world, someone is already looking at that exact same object and calculating exactly how much it is worth. If this video changed the way you look at the stuff sitting in your trash can right now, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you catch the next one. And I really want to know, out of everything in this video, which one shocked you the most? Was it the battery worth more than gold? The silver hiding inside a solar panel? Or the law that fixed an entire city almost overnight? Let me know in the comments, because I actually read them and they help me pick what to cover next. If you like this one, you are going to want to check out the video where I break down how factories are now designing brand new products to be taken apart on purpose, right from the very start.